Hey everybody, and welcome to something just a little bit different. Don't adjust your headsets. I have a new microphone, and I wanted to celebrate that fact, which I've been looking forward to for a while now, with something different. In my channel description, I say that I'm a fantasy writer, voice impressionist, and role player. All those three things are true. But since I've started uploading regularly to my channel, I've noticed that I've primarily been focusing on the second two, and not as much on the first. There's been some narrativizing in the Amunera Skyrim Let's Play, but that's not the only part of writing, is the presentation. It's a big part of writing, don't get me wrong, but it's not the meat of what I want to do on my channel with regards to fantasy writing. I really like watching or listening to, because really this is more of a podcast form, and you're all welcome to just put me on the background. I have gameplay of me playing Dark and Darker with a friend up, but that's mostly just to entertain if people need a visual stimulus. But I really enjoy listening to and talking about writing fantasy, and primarily this is done for me in the context of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, that's not the only context. When I say I'm a fantasy writer, that is not a necessarily idle boast. I'm in the process of writing a novel myself, but a lot of it comes from Dungeons and Dragons. And I thought for my first foray into I don't want to call it a video essay because this is completely unscripted. I'm just talking into a microphone right now, sharing my thoughts. But this nebulous space we shall call a video dissertation. I wanted to talk about fantasy writing in relation to Dungeons and Dragons, because I feel that Dungeons and Dragons is actually one of the best, if not the best, ways to get into fantasy as a genre, and more specifically, writing it. Now, you might see where this is about to be going. I'm going to be talking primarily about dungeon mastering or game mastering, because as a player, there is only so much you can do. Individually, I mean. As a collective, players are 50% of the storytelling of D&D, but I'm talking about individually, so bear with me. That other 50% of storytelling and improvisation and development comes from the game master, right? And so being a game master gives up-and-coming or prospective, aspirant, whatever, writers a really good field to practice their craft in a safe environment. And it also teaches some really important lessons that I wish that I had learned from the beginning, but that took me a really long time to figure out on my own before I started doing game mastering, because I'm relatively late to the party, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today has been said by people who are probably better versed in the subject than I am. Game mastering allows you the opportunity to fail in a way that just writing fantasy doesn't, if that makes any sense. It allows you to fail and have a positive result in the failure of your writing. Because when you're sitting alone, and I've been here, when you're sitting alone at your desk or on your couch or in a wherever, wherever, and you're just spitballing into the ether your ideas for your fantasy world, or you're writing, say, a poem, or trying to come up with a good plot hook for why people should be invested in your work. all of those times where you go, it doesn't work, does it? And you scratch it out, or those times where you go, man, that's really funny, and I wish I could have that in my in my project, but I know I can't. Those just they get lost to time. They're gone forever. And no one ever gets to see or appreciate the process except you. And again, something that I know from great experience, you can be your own worst critic. You can be really critical about yourself just absolutely mercilessly. You can just go off the deep end on yourself about, you should have known better. You should have done this differently, because of course you should have. You're you. You know that it should have been done differently. Why didn't you? And a lot of the positives of the creative process, of the failures of the creative process, get lost in that noise that you create for yourself. It gets lost in that constant expectation of yourself, or at least it does for me, because I can't speak for everybody. I'm speaking from my own personal experience. But in Dungeons and Dragons, or tabletop in general, I say Dungeons and Dragons as my one concession to the algorithm to see if this will get some ears on it. In Dungeons and Dragons, failure is funny. And failure is rewarding. And there's not a lot of competition on the market for situations where you can be telling a story, flub a line, or do a typo, verbal, or whatever, and instead of feeling embarrassed about it, you can laugh about it with your friends and make it a memorable moment that is better than anything you could have written. Even though you know, if this were a structured environment, you never would have done it. You would have deleted it or otherwise gotten rid of it to hope that no one ever saw it. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you can go boldly into that space, that unknown environment of, I'm going to take a chance and do something silly. I'm going to take a chance and do something dumb and not feel ashamed about it. You can also, in the improvisational nature of D&D, come up with situations organically that never would have shown up in your own writing. And this is where the players come in. Because remember, I said they are 50% of the entire experience. Players allow you, as a game master, but, primarily we're talking about writing here, as a writer, to stress test your creations in a way that you can't do on your own. They can think of things that you never would. I mean, it's a common trope in tabletop gaming, right? The players are chaos monkeys that will do any opportunity to ruin the DM's day. Or at least they try, because as every game master knows, we secretly love it. But they can do that, and they can find the little holes and the little nitpicks and the little things that your eyes completely gloss over when you're doing it on your own. And they can bring them to the forefront and make you go, wait, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, that's something that I should have thought of. And sometimes those little nitpicks or plot holes or what have you turn out to be really good because of the improvisational nature of D&D. Once again, you can turn those little things, those errors in your storytelling, into positives, into things that will be useful later on. Let's say, as a hypothetical, you have a world where your magic system is very soft, right? It doesn't have a lot of preordained rules. You just kind of go with the flow in it. And there's a spell in D&D that lets people do illusions, right? And one of your players goes, hey, my idea for an illusion isn't exactly in the spell description. However, according to the laws that you've set forth so far, which again are few and far between, but from the few that you've given, this is conceivably possible. Can I do that? And you can go, yeah, actually, my world would allow for that to happen. But let me actually expand on this point just a little bit more, because I'm not entirely sure that one example like that really explains what I'm trying to say. By your players can push you to learn new things about your own world, right? When you have people who once a week focus 2, 3, 4, 5, however many hours solely on your fantasy creation, you get a kind of laser-focused critical analysis of it that you don't get anywhere else. You have 2 to 5 people, more if you're insane, who just full send obsess over your creation. Think about that. Think about how many writers, how many authors, how many artists would kill for that once a month, once a year, and you can have it, again, if your group is consistent, once a week? And they can ask very insightful, probing questions, like that illusion example I gave earlier, that can completely blindside you and make you reevaluate the strengths and weaknesses of your creation. You know, you could have a world focused almost exclusively on a very thoughtful deliberation on religiosity in medieval times. And then an intersectional question from your player like, hey, if religion is so important in this world, if it's so critical to the way people live, why don't I see more people in the political sphere, like kings or queens or dukes, obsessing over it? Why aren't they as invested in the small folk? And if they say that at the open table, then you can get some free world building from your players, because they'll do one of two things. They could say, oh, and before I even go on, I say one of two things, but to make my own point, there's more than two things I can say there that I don't know. But anyway, the two things I would think that they would say are, oh, either the nobles don't care about religion like the masses do, in which case, why is that? Is it because they're the ones pulling the strings and they know that it's all a sham? Or is it that the nobles do care about religion, they're just more private about it? And if they're more private about it, why? Now, if you take those two things, and you don't have to have had a plan for it to begin with, this example operates under the assumption that the GM did not think of this beforehand. You can get players to help you flesh out your world before you ever write anything down. And their ideas are free. They give them to you for free. They know you might take them. That's the unspoken, or no, I should say it should be the spoken understanding at your table, but a lot of the time it is unspoken, that the DM will sometimes take inspiration from the players just as the players take inspiration from the GM. And now your world, through very little effort of your own other than the subtle and constant prodding that every GM gives to their players, now has this really interesting question of, why are the nobles seemingly so unreligious? And you can choose to expand on this either in the game that you're playing, or you can hold on to it for your own story. You can go, well, I don't know. Would you like to find out? And they can say, yeah. And then in the D&D story, you find out the answer. Or if they go, not really, it was kind of just an interesting aside, but we have this other quest that we want to go do instead. You can then keep that idea in your back pocket as an interesting hook that someone who was focused on your work already made this correlation in your writing, and you can go back to the drawing board and shape it to your own interests, to your own desires in fantasy. And this ties into the next thing that GMing in D&D does really well for a fantasy writer. It helps you learn in real time what your strengths and weaknesses are and how to handle them. Now, it's easy to explain how D&D can show you your strengths. You just look at what your players liked. You go, okay, they really liked this dungeon crawl and it had X, Y, Z, and A and B and C in it. And then you replicate it, or you expand upon it, or you remix it in some way that they will again like. Or you can go, okay, they didn't like X, Y, Z, A, B, C in E, F, G, and avoid it in the future. But you can do more than just that. And this does kind of go into the sphere of general, critical improvement. But if you learn what your strengths are, and you know the approximate boundaries of the things that you can do that work, you can then go beyond those boundaries while relying on the foundation that you've already created to do new things. You can go, oh, that dungeon worked for XYZ reasons. I'm now going to put in A, B, and C. You can add on to your strengths to safely develop new strengths from them in, again, like I said earlier, that safe environment where failure is encouraged and adored by your players. The other side of this coin is your weaknesses. If you get told that someone didn't quite like this, well, now you have a choice. You can either never touch it again with a 10-foot pole and keep it in the back of your mind as something that you weren't good at and will never be good at, or you can try again. And you can try again in a different way. There are thousands of examples of creatives throughout time who became very good at and well known for something that in the beginning they were told they were garbage at. They just kept going. They kept remixing it. They kept trying to do it in different ways until they turned that weakness into a strength. And remember, as I keep saying, in D&D, failure is encouraged. You are encouraged as a writer to do things that you think won't work, because there's no harm in it. There's nothing to lose by experimenting in those ways. When you're writing a book, when you're painting a picture, when you're writing music, and you're doing it commercially, there is an incentive to focus on what you know you can do well, because you know that people will read it, people will listen to it, people will experience it, and people will buy it. You'll get money from it. In D&D, there's no money except the fantastical money. There's no expectation that every single word coming out of the game master's mouth will be perfect. You can just keep going and going and going trying new things, doing different things, things that you are 90% certain won't work, like my gameplay in Dark and Darker right now, or this video, but you do them anyway because you think they won't work, because you think you might fail. But you don't learn something new. You don't learn a new way of doing something you're already good at if you don't try those new things. If you stay in your box of your strengths, you'll never get better. And in that way, D&D gives you a perfect outlet as a fantasy writer. Other than those two things, well, three things, I guess, if you want to count weaknesses and strengths as separate things, is learning a base. So, you know how I said strengths earlier, right? Well, I'm about to do a 180 on you because you don't want to lean on your strengths and stress your weaknesses 100% of the time. To coin a very pithy phrase, sometimes moderation is key. There's a reason that big moments are memorable in D&D. It's because they're big moments. There's a reason that the end of a big plot, a big payoff in a novel or a movie or a TV show are memorable. It's because it is the culmination of everything else. And you can't rely on that 100% of the time in your writing. There are going to be times where you are creating a world where you have to sit down and go, what does this road look like? What color is the grass? Is it a light green? Is it a dark green? How well traveled are these roads? Are they byways that not many people go by, or is it a highway that is paved completely and that is upkept by the local lord? And you have to find in those small things, things that can draw your reader or player in. I believe that when it comes to writing, the base foundations of the world that you make, the little things, are just as important as the great bombastic fight sequences or dramatic courtroom intrigue. You know, there's a reason why Lord of the Rings has so many songs and talks about tobacco and how all these people are resting and sleeping and eating so much. There's a reason that Game of Thrones has 100 different paragraph-long dissertations on the type of food that the characters are eating, so on and so forth. It's because you need to also find a place in the chaos for the normal, for everyday things that everyday people would be experiencing. And now you might start to ask yourself, well, Shale, that's all well and good, but how is this specific to D&D? Well, again, it's because the players can give you ideas, and it's because you can experiment in that environment without fear of failure. If your characters, your players, go into an inn and they go, gee, what kind of food's here? You can do one of two things. You can go the usual kind, or you can say, oh, they've got, steak and taters. They've got stew, chicken stew, and they've also got pork and so on and so forth. And then you get cut off, and your player goes, oh, so they have a lot of meat products here. Yeah, they do. And then suddenly, that little town that they came into is actually a farm town that does mostly meat products. Do you see where I'm going with this? The normalcy of your world allows the players to find situations where they are so invested and they want to know more that they prompt you to create more things to get them invested. And you can keep that kind of cycle going the whole time and build out the base with your players. You can get an entire kingdom's worth of little tiny details about where all the food comes from and where all the clothes come from and what kind of materials that food and clothes are made out of, just by indulging your players in their little seemingly innocuous questions. By going, yeah, I'm going to give you an actual answer rather than just shrugging and going, I don't know. Because while it's perfectly valid as a game master to say, I don't know, to a question that a player asks you, goodness knows I've done it plenty of times, I would challenge you, if you are a game master, to try not to. Not to stress over it, not to go, oh, I have to have an answer for everything. No, I'm not saying have an answer ready. I'm saying trust yourself and your players to come up with an answer when the question is asked, and then keep a note of it for yourself. And if you do that, you will find, like I said, that your players will generate for you vast swaths of information that you never would have come up with on your own. Now, I also recognize, looking back on everything that I've said so far today, a lot of this stuff might seem like common knowledge to someone already invested in the fantasy scene, someone who is already working on their fantasy project, someone who is already writing something or GMing. And if you've made it this far into the video and you're someone like that, thank you. Thank you, first off. But secondly, have a little empathy for me here, because I didn't quite make this for you. I made this as my first video talking about being a GM for the people who I'm assuming will probably be on the younger side, who maybe don't have the confidence or don't have the expertise or experience to know these things. You know, you see a lot of times on the internet, up and coming GMs and players who will go, man, how do they do it? How do they come up with all these smooth, clean, epic sequences and all these incredibly detailed worlds? This is it. Or at least this is my way of doing it. You know, again, I can't speak for everybody, but this is my way. And there is value in hearing that in an environment that is unstructured. When I was learning how to do GMing, I hated the idea of structured learning of it. I almost never, I fell into GMing honestly by accident. I actually hated the idea of doing it beforehand, because the one experience I ever had playing before I GM'd was with someone who was very controlling, very particular, very stickler for everything you said and everything you did. And there are a lot of people out there who still do that. I feel like, and this is a completely vibes-based argument, so forgive me, I feel like maybe 30% of everything I see on the internet when it comes to how do I run a game, how do I do this, how do I do that, how do I write, come from those people who are very stickler to the rules and very much so want everything to be exact and have its place. And I want to create a video here, and maybe more in the future. This is kind of fun. I'm enjoying just talking and sharing my thoughts on this, where people can hear all these ideas in a intentionally disjointed way. I'm not saying that to cover up my own lack of experience just talking into a microphone or my own disjointed thought process. I'm saying that because I mean it. Not everybody learns in a linear or detail-focused way. Some people need a broad, scattered approach that touches on a lot of things at once. And that was how I learned. And I had to teach myself how to do that. I had to teach myself to be okay with learning in these disjointed patterns that didn't make sense to anybody else. I'm being looked at like I was crazy when I would do something in role-playing games or otherwise that nobody would think of doing because nobody thought the way I did. But it's okay to do those kinds of things. It's okay to lean on the improvised nature of D&D, of the encouraged failure environment to get your bearings, your sea legs in writing. Like I said at the beginning of this, I actually think that's one of, if not the best way to get into writing, is doing it in that environment. And I know that there are a lot of caveats to this. I know that one of the first things someone could say in counter to this is, well, that works really well if you have friends who are willing to create a failure is encouraged environment. Because I know, again, like I said it myself, there are a lot of people who don't like to encourage failure. They want everything to be in its neat little boxes from the beginning. I get that. But if you can find 2, 3 people who are okay with that kind of environment and who encourage you as a GM or as a writer to push yourself and test yourself, it's game changing. It really is. Take me for an example. 4 years ago now, I had completely given up on my dream of being a writer. I was, completely convinced that my life was going to be nothing but an office job and doing a 9-to-5 like everybody else. But I got those few people who encouraged me again and again and again to fail, to experiment, to try things that otherwise I never would have tried. And thanks to them and that environment that we shared and continue to share, because I am lucky enough to still have those people in my life, I started posting videos on YouTube. I wanted to tell a story through video games, 2 things that I love doing. And going into it, I went, this could get 0 views. I could get nobody who cares about this. But that's okay, because I care about it, and I enjoy doing it. And no matter what happens, I've tried. And that's something that I feel a lot of people, especially young people, they don't give themselves the latitude to do. They don't allow themselves to go, the attempt was worth it, even if it failed. The attempt and the failure are good in and of themselves. And to bring it all back home, in Dungeons and Dragons, if you have a good group, if you have good friends, if you have a good head on your shoulders, the failure is the good part. Failure is encouraged. And that's why I think playing Dungeons and Dragons, particularly GMing Dungeons and Dragons, is such a powerful tool for the next generation of fantasy writers. Because you can fail with your friends in a environment that nobody that would be a prospective reader of yours need ever see. And it can be rewarding. You can fail again and again and again. Your world can look like a jumbled primordial mess. And it doesn't matter. You just keep going. And with the Promethean fire given to every human, eventually, with your friends or on your own, if after the campaign you're still not happy with it, you can take that jumbled mess and turn it into something beautiful. So get out there. Play Dungeons and Dragons. Go try it if you've never done it before. If you like writing, if you like creating fantasy things, just try it. I get it if you're shy. I get it if you're nervous around strangers. I understand. But try it once. Just the once. And see if it helps. If it does, do it again. If it doesn't, do it again. Because failure is success. And I think it would do the new generation of writers quite a bit of good if they tried. So, I hope you enjoyed listening to this. This was fun to record. I think I'm going on what? Yeah, almost 40 minutes, and I didn't even expect to get to 20. I hope it was cohesive, and I'll probably do this every so often in tandem with my Skyrim playthrough, which if you haven't seen, if you're just passing in the crossroads of YouTube and you stumble upon a video discussion video and you go, oh well they have a decent head on their shoulders, why give it a look-see. I try to upload about every day, and I'm quite proud of my little project that I've got going so far. But anyway, thank you so much for listening this far in. I hope that something in here was insightful or helpful, or even just a little bit made you think. Bonus points if it made you think different than you already thought. But anyway, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.